which he came to hear. Helen Evans is a licensed mental health professional for Anderson Vertical Team. And what is the Clifton Development Center?
So Clifton Development Center is a place where high school students that want to be trained in career jobs, if they're under special education, they can go to that center and get trained. And they have great programming in the morning and afternoon. It's one or the other, and they can learn things like culinary arts and all kinds of wonderful things. So that's one of my schools. I have 8 schools, and that's one of them. I'm the licensed mental health professional. I always have to think, what am I calling LMHP for our vertical team? So my office is at Anderson High School. I also provide services for Murchison, Davis, Doss, Pillow, Hill, what am I missing? Summit. But sometimes it's hard to remember all of them. So thank you for having me tonight. And I realized I have handouts out there, but I realized I may not have made enough copies. So I will supply you, scan all the different handouts so that we can put them on the website. Is that where you put them?
We will distribute everything when we distribute the meeting minutes and the presentation.
Great. And then did you get the PowerPoint, the email that I sent?
Yes, I'm sitting here eating pizza. Sorry, guys.
Oh, that's fine. And so we'll have that up also on the website?
Yes,
Great.
absolutely.
Okay, good. So let me explain a little bit what it means, why we have LMHPs, licensed mental health professionals in AISD. So I have 3 major roles. One of them is I'm on the district crisis team, which means if there's a school in our district that needs extra counselors to go and help with grief counseling, I'm on that team that goes and does that. And it can be anywhere in the district. And then my second role is to provide backup support to our wonderful school counselors like Sherry Garza, wonderful. And then my third role is that I provide a connection to community resources for students and families. So, and then just knowing that there's a disclaimer that I have to put in there that if I talk about any resources, I'm not recommending them like from AISD's perspective. It's just an inclusion of different ideas for resources. So I'm hoping that we can get a little bit of an overview about depression and anxiety in children, and then talk a little bit about prevention and some treatment resources. It's a broad overview. So if you have any more questions or just want to talk to me, at the end I'll have a slide that has my email and my phone number so that you can contact me. So we'll get started. So with children with depression, and I'm talking about depression and anxiety both because many times they co-occur. And so with depression, we're all going to experience sad moments. It really is more thinking about the intensity, the persistence, the excessive part. So like we can have our kind of down days, even a down week, but we're kind of looking at more of like, there's more intensity and more persistence with this duration. So some of the symptoms could be like we think of with depression, feeling sad. But you know, it's interesting with kids, a lot of times it's not feeling sad, or sometimes they are, but it also could be irritability or being cranky, or even having tantrums and acting out with aggression can also be signs of depression. Changes in eating patterns and sleep patterns and energy. So maybe with eating, they're not eating very much at all and it's a change, or they're eating a lot all the time and it's really hard for them to stop. It's looking at a change in what's happening. Maybe they're not interested in playing with their friends as much. And there is a handout, it's the yellow one, and on one side it says signs, symptoms, and contributing factors. I wonder if we have more out there. Do you mind seeing if there's any left out there? That'd be awesome. So this could be a really great tool to look at because I got it from the book, Depression in Your Child, a Guide for Parents and Caregivers. It actually is a book in the Austin Public Library. I'm a big fan. I read all the time. So I kind of put this as a way to look at it from a biopsychosocial. So biology, psychology, and social factors, because when we look at that approach, depression and anxiety can be very complex, and usually it has, there's contributing factors in each of these categories. So on this handout, it talks about the eating and the sleeping. Sleep is huge. I know when I am sleep deprived or exhausted, my mood changes. Well, our kids do that too, and I have adult children now, and I do highly recommend adult children. It's very nice. A lot easier. But I remember as a mom, sometimes my child would be very cranky or something. I was like, what is going on? And then I would figure out they're sick. Like they didn't have a fever that night, and here I am all irritated with them. So that's one of the things I'm going to talk about too. Is a lot of times that we can see symptoms of depression and anxiety, but really there's an underlying cause that's different, and we'll talk about that a little bit too. And also just considering that with medical illness, there are some rare times that a medical illness can present as mental health symptoms. So for example, this is a very extreme example. There's a condition called PANDAS, and it happens in kids, it's very rare, and strep throat, for some reason in a rare case of kids, they will present with OCD symptoms all of a sudden. They'll be very obsessive compulsive about something. And the parent, I was a therapist for a while in Dallas, and I had a child brought to me by a parent, and they were like, all of a sudden, my child is just scared of everything and obsessively thinking about things, and it was just an abrupt overnight thing. And I said, well, you need to go to the doctor and get all the lab tests done. And it was strep throat, and it was PANDAS, and as soon as they got the antibiotics, all the symptoms went away. So now that's an extreme example, but I always tell parents, if they're starting to worry and see symptoms,
No, I'm trying to get out of the way here. No.
if you're seeing symptoms that where it's an abrupt change, please go to your pediatrician and get an evaluation and lab tests for that. Also, some other things we'll see with kids that sometimes they'll be very inflexible thinking, like it's either always or never, and it's hard for them to get to the gray area. Sometimes they get preoccupied by death and dying, and that's normal for kids to kind of be a little curious about it, but if they become very preoccupied or they're doing a lot of drawings about death or dying, that's something to be considering. And then of course, like being self-critical, self-blaming, and then just a lack of interest in play. A lot of times contributing factors, of course, can be stressful life events, like in our families, divorce or a loss or a trauma that's happened. And then of course, abrupt changes in school. Looking for that. If all of a sudden they're not wanting to attend school, or their grades all of a sudden go down, or their motivation in school, that's something to be considering as well. So, oh, sure. Okay, thank you. Okay, so and then with anxiety, so anxiety can actually be a good thing. For most people, it can be a motivating thing. We need it in our lives to make us do things sometimes. But when it, again, if we're considering the idea of it being the level of intensity, the persistence, the duration, when we consider that, children experience increasing fears and worries that interfere with school, home, or play, then they may have an anxiety disorder. So it's kind of thinking about that. How is it interfering? Is it intense? Is it lasting a long time? Is it excessive? A lot of times kids will, if they start to present with some anxiety symptoms, they'll ask questions over and over again about the same thing. Now, most kids do that at one point or another in their life, but if it's continuing to happen for a long time and starting to cause the interfering with home or school or play, then it's something to consider. So there's different kinds of anxiety. We all probably are familiar with separation anxiety when the kids are babies and they don't want to leave their parent. But that can happen with children and even teenagers too. And then having an extreme fear about something, like a phobia, like my sister here, I have a father that's an airline pilot, and my sister developed a phobia of flying on airplanes. So she had to try to figure that out. And then social anxiety. Some people get kind of overwhelmed with big groups of people or certain places that are going to have groups of people. General anxiety. So general anxiety can include a lot of things. I want to make sure to cover what those are. It can look different with different kids. Like for example, sleep disturbance could definitely be one of the things to be considering. when we're looking at symptoms. Irritability, muscle tension, restlessness. Kids can be restless. They can even present with anger. And again, the physical symptoms too. I have a headache or I don't feel well. The somatic symptoms can happen with anxiety and with depression. So, did I cover all the other ones? Of course, panic disorder. I don't know if y'all have ever had a panic attack, but it is very scary. And we do have kids that have panic attacks, especially at the middle school and the high school. So learning that a panic attack once in your life, that might happen. But if it's a continued thing, then thinking about seeking professional help for that. And just remembering that kids, they really can be different in the way they present for anxiety and depression than with adults. Okay, I'm putting this up, and I won't talk about it a lot, but we are seeing more school refusal. It's a form of avoidance, and it could be a symptom of deeper issues of anxiety or mood or trauma disorder. And it's possibly because the kid is avoiding bullying or some sort of challenging or academic social situation. They have a fear of failure or that perfectionism, and they're scared to show failure. Or they have this fear of being separated with the parent, like the separation anxiety. And so the reason I'm bringing this up is because we are seeing more of this in the middle school and the high school. I've worked in schools for over 20 years, and we're just seeing kind of increasing rates of depression and anxiety, and then now we're seeing some of this more than we used to. This was always present, but we're seeing a little more of it. And now there's actually a program in Austin, a partial hospitalization program that specifically is addressing this issue. So I just wanted to bring it up because it is something that if your child is, let's say you're having a power struggle trying to get your kid to school, oh boy, power struggles. So if it becomes something that is happening over and over and over again, then it'd be important to share it with your school counselor and maybe even seek outside professional help, because you want to try to get that figured out before they move on to middle school and high school. Because the thing about avoidance is that it can actually help us feel better when we're feeling anxious. And I don't know about you, but sometimes I love Netflix because I can just avoid. And then, but the more I do it, the more I want to do it. Oh, there's another episode, I'll try that. So if we start avoiding, we feel better, and then it makes us avoid more. And that's the same cycle that can happen with this. So just something to be considering. It's still pretty rare, but it is happening a little bit more now. Okay, and then just knowing that suicide is the second leading cause of death for ages 10 to 24. And are there any kids in here? Okay. More teenagers and young adults die from suicide than cancer, heart disease, AIDS, birth defects, stroke, pneumonia, influenza, and chronic lung disease combined. So it is something that we need to be paying attention to, and it's part of the reason, thank you for letting me come talk about this, because mental health matters, and we need to be talking about it, because then it makes the stigma go away. I'm seeing kids now, peers in our middle schools and high schools, are going to the school counselors and saying, my friend needs your help, or I'm worried about my friend. And I love that that is becoming something that is a little more socially acceptable now. So, and then of course, concerns and warning signs for suicide. One thing I just wanted to point out with this is that it's not always verbal, but a lot of times it is verbal. That kids tell us things, teenagers tell us things. Sometimes it's drawings, and sometimes it can be online. So that's what I'm loving too about peers are starting to tell us when they see things online about their other peers. A preoccupation with death, of course depression, experiencing a loss, all of those kinds of things. So just, this will be on the website, so you can review this if you wanted to know more about that. But, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what to do about that. So in terms of prevention and treatment of depression and anxiety, there's levels of care. And I like to just, this is not well done because I'm not great at PowerPoints, but I like to show, because sometimes we'll have a child that ends up in the hospital for a crisis, a mental health crisis, when if they had been doing these things all along, they probably probably wouldn't have ended up there. Now, we can't say that's always the case, but many times we see that if there has been prevention happening at home, a lot of times when kids are showing signs of depression and anxiety, they're not getting good sleep. I can't tell you how many kids are not getting good sleep in our schools. Nutrition, I can't tell you how many kids are not eating consistently, or they're not eating anything with nutrition in it. And then exercise. I mean, we know from research that exercise, actually, they did research on kids, I think it was with adults, but it was comparing exercise versus being on a prescription medication. Medications have saved lives. I'm not saying that a person shouldn't be on one, because there are literally people that it has saved their life. But it showed that exercise was just as effective as somebody on medication for depression. So, and that was for more mild depression and not severe. But it's interesting how there's studies showing that, and that's why it's great when our kids are moving their bodies and running around and getting worn out so they can sleep really well for us, and we're not completely worn out ourselves when they're not sleeping. And then the mindfulness part. I know people sometimes think of that and they think of it as meditation, which is great, but it doesn't have to be meditation. It can be yoga. It can, sometimes people even say, like, for me, it's running. I run and I can get my mind clear. And kids have all different ways of practicing mindfulness. We do breathing exercises together, et cetera. It can be fun. So doing a lot of that prevention in our families can actually really help prevent things from getting over there. And then medical exam, I had mentioned that before. There are also other medical issues that could present as mental health symptoms. I know for me, I struggled with some mild depression as a teenager and a young adult, and that's why I love speaking about it and I love my job. And because I've had many friends and family members too that have had this issue as well. And for me, we figured out I wasn't absorbing B12 and it was making my body feel depressed. So when I got that fixed, my depression has lifted. I'm not saying it's that easy, but every now and then there are things that where we're sick and our body is showing it. And mono, I just had a friend whose daughter went to college, got mono, and then she got the flu. And now she's having all kinds of mental health symptoms where they're gonna look at fixing the illnesses, and I bet the mental health symptoms are gonna improve as well. So making sure to tell a school counselor if academics, attendance, behavior, or a child's social life is being impacted. That way, and a teacher here at the elementary level. Sometimes it's hard at middle school and high school when they have so many teachers, but here the teacher and the school counselor can be a great resource for kind of figuring out what to do next and how the school might provide some supports. And then seeking therapy. Psychologists and then licensed professional counselors, licensed clinical social workers, and licensed marriage and family therapists have the degrees and the licensures to be able to provide private practice therapy. And we have a lot of great resources, and I'll share a little bit at the end about that. And just so you know, I collect from y'all, parents share with me things that are working for them in terms of a therapist that their child is seeing, and then I keep a running list of outside organizations in our area. Some of them are fee-for-service, though, so we have to consider that. But I can be a resource with kind of helping kind of figure out resources in the area. And then medical mental health treatment. IOP is intensive outpatient program and PHP is partial hospitalization program. I share this with parents because a lot of times what will happen is a child will be seeing a therapist once a week and then be hospitalized and then go back to seeing a therapist once a week. And sometimes what they need is something in between. And these programs you don't spend the night. Like inpatient hospitalization, you're spending the night. But these partial hospitalization and IOP, intensive outpatient, means you go during the day. Sometimes it's during the school day, sometimes it's night, and you get a lot of therapy, and so it can be a good in-between. So that's good to know about too. So what can we do as parents? We can be doing our prevention meds, which is kind of what I talked about a little bit already. Mindfulness, exercise, diet, nutrition, and sleep. Really focusing on that in our families. I think it's very easy then we aren't doing this for ourselves, right? So I have a little more time for that now with self-care now that my kids are older. So looking at that, if you're starting to worry about your child, first go to prevention meds. Are we doing this in our house? And if not, what can we be doing differently with that? And then also, what can we as parents be doing? We can be paying attention to, are we role modeling the behavior we hope to see in our kids? A lot of times when we have a child that's presenting with a lot of anxiousness, they've got a parent that's doing that too. So sometimes the parent going and getting help for that then helps the child, because then they see that their parent, oh, okay, now it's a little more calm in our house. It's very easy for us to be wound up as parents. We have quite a lot on our plates, don't we? And then consider how we're managing technology in our families. That can affect sleep. Is it being used in a positive way? Because there's a lot of positive about technology. How are we managing our stress and our feelings of loss and anger? Are we showing that we can express that emotionally in a healthy way and staying emotionally regulated somewhat? Here I am talking about that, but there were many times I did not role model emotional regulation as healthy as I could have. And you can ask my kids about it. They will tell you all about those times. And then managing relationships and communication with our family members. Are we showing respect to each other so that we can role model that, so then they know how to do that with their friends and peers outside of the family, because that is, in essence, part of a protective factor for kids, whether or not they can relate to at least one other peer, right, to have a good friend. And then practicing self-care. Woo, it is hard to fit in, but that is something where the kids are watching us. What's my parent doing to take care of themselves? And then what also can we do? Watch and listen to our children and pay attention to sudden changes. Be willing to seek professional help, and the pediatrician is always a good start. And talk openly with children and be supportive in helping them cope with their feelings. And then there's also another handout. It's called Change the Conversation. The National Alliance for Mental Illness is an awesome resource, NAMI. And I love this handout because it kind of gives you some ideas of things that you can actually say to people, not just your kids, but to family members or friends that you might be worried about. I also love that it says treatment success rates for mental health are similar to other health issues. The good news is people can achieve health and wellness, so it's very positive. But asking certain questions like, I've noticed that you're sleeping more, are you okay? It seems like you're going through a difficult time, how can I help you? I care about you and I want to listen. What do you want to share about how you're feeling? Just leaving those kind of open-ended, that's great with kids, because if you're kind of in a comfortable spot with them, that's kind of quiet in the car, or maybe going on a walk or something, sometimes they're willing to share something that might surprise you. You'll learn a lot about them. And then we have friends and family members that we could be asking those things with to start the conversation going. So. And then, of course, if you're really worried about someone, stay with them and ask them right off, how are you doing? You can say, are you having thoughts of hurting yourself? Do you have a plan? Do you have access and intend to carry out this plan? Stay engaged with them. You can call 911, but MCOT is a wonderful resource. I'm going to show you that in just 1 minute on this resource page. MCOT is Mobile Crisis Outreach Team. And in Travis County, if you called 911 and you said, I want a professional, a mental health professional to come and help me, they will send a team of professionals that are specifically designed to offer mental health help and assessment. And so we in the schools have actually called MCOT before. Like if a parent got to the school and said, I can't take them anywhere to get them assessed because my car's not working, I don't have a car, I don't have transportation. Sometimes we'll call MCOT and MCOT will come to the school. Sometimes families have gone home at their home and then they worry about their child and they've called MCOT and MCOT's come to the home. So it's a great resource. And then, of course, there's always the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. So then the other side of the yellow paper has some ideas about prevention, treatment, and holistic approaches. looking at this biopsychosocial lens. A few things I wanted to point out about that is the idea of sunlight. Sometimes people that are showing signs of depression are actually deficient in vitamin D, and sometimes getting some sunlight, but you need to talk to the pediatrician about that, because, you know, with wearing sunscreen, that doesn't work, and we do want to put sunscreen on our kids too. But that's something to consider too, is vitamin D is very important. And then also the types of psychological treatment, the types of therapy. There's lots of awesome evidence-based types of therapy, like cognitive behavioral therapy, and it explains a little bit about what that is. Play therapy is wonderful with young kids. There's family therapy, dialectical behavior therapy, and it explains that right there. And then, of course, learning how to practice mindfulness, kids developing coping skills and talking about coping skills. How do they get through hard moments when they're feeling stuck? And then exposure to nature and animals. At Murchison and at Anderson, we have comfort dogs that visit the schools, and I cannot tell you how fun it is to watch middle school and high school kids around these comfort dogs. And then improving, of course, we talked about, you know, improving positive family and social life. That could really make a difference in how a kid's feeling about themselves. And then just the back to the role modeling as we as parents, helping our kids kind of figure that out. So I really want to focus too that taking your kid to a medical exam and getting all the lab tests done and really talking through with the pediatrician what your concerns are can really be a great first start if you start to be concerned that there's a little more intensity or the persistence or duration of symptoms that you're seeing. And then I will end with, you have a handout, AISD resource guide for parents. I just want to point out a few things on it. On the front side, the counseling list. This is certainly not all the counseling that is available in Austin. There's no way we could ever list it on one page. But I do want to point out, Austin Child Guidance Center is a pretty amazing place. They take all kinds of insurance, Medicaid, and they do fee-for-service and sliding scale. And they have, like, for example, they had a Dealing with Stress teen group for ages 13 to 16. It's an 8-week group that starts at the end of this month. They have a friendship group going on right now for ages 6 to 8 that started at the beginning of February. And last week they had a parent workshop about test anxiety. So they have a lot of great things on their website about their different services. So I wanted to point that out. And Safe Alliance actually has groups that happen at Murchison and at Anderson. It's called Expect Respect. It's about healthy relationships. And then the YWCA is a great place to go for counseling. They're trauma informed. They even have some therapists that are trained in somatic experiencing. It's kind of a new form of doing therapy with people that have experienced trauma. And they provide individual, couples, family, and group therapy as well as play therapy. So that could be another great resource. And then on the back, I wanted to point out that there's hotlines listed on here, and then NAMI is on here, and NAMI has all kinds of support groups for parents. Oh, and then on the front again, crisis service. I talked about MCOT, so MCOT's number is right here. It's the 472-HELP, and it's also Integral Care, which is another great place that parents can take their kids for counseling as well. That's very affordable. So that's about it. I tried to do just a big overview, and here's my email, helen.evans@austinisd.org, and my work phone number. Feel free to call me. I know I put my business cards out there too, and I'll get the handouts on the website and the PowerPoint on the website.
Yeah, we will make sure we distribute that. We also took a video of this entire thing, and we'll make sure that that ends up on the website.
I'm not sure I'm gonna watch that.
It's hard.
So y'all, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be part of this vertical team. I just started last year, so yay, I'm getting to know Sherry, and I love working with her, and hopefully I'll get to know all of y'all too.
Thank you so much. Hey, so I'd love Mrs. Garza to stand up. Mrs. Garza. If you guys don't know, this is our one and only counselor at Davis Elementary, and she rocks. She's amazing. Well, she's got me over there, she saved me over it. She does things with my kids, me personally. She's been a huge help, so thank you, Sherry. Thank you, Helen.
Yeah.
I think that's it. Do you guys have any questions about this? We're gonna make sure all of this content is on the web. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you for bringing your children. She's talking about modeling good behavior, and it's one of the things that I think is important, is that our children seeing us coming and being active.
I know, I love this.
Learning more information, and seeing us work to help the school. So thank you for participating. And I think it's a wrap at exactly 8:30. Thank you so much.